4 facts why I think federal government contracting is the best, and I do mean the absolute best industry for veterans. Fact 1, 2022 President's budget that is most relevant to our experience, the veteran community's experience, is DoD, Intel, Department of Homeland Security, the VA, sections of DOE, Department of Energy, with the national labs and the nuclear program, and also the State Department with policies, foreign affairs, foreign military, and all that kind of stuff. So those are the 6 different agencies, organizations that are most relevant to us. I want to highlight the 4 that are really relevant to us: DoD, Intel, DHS, VA. You can see it right there. $715 billion is going to DoD in 2022. Intel community, $85 billion. DHS coming in at a bargain, $52 billion. Then there's the Veterans Administration, $270 billion, plus major sections of DOE and Department of State. These are areas where we have a lot of relevance. Fact 2, only 5% of US companies are pursuing these contracts. That blows a lot of people's mind. Only 5% of US companies pursue support of the US federal government. The US federal government is by large, by any standard, the world's largest customer. There are no close seconds, none. So only 5% of US companies choose to pursue the world's largest customer, the best paying customer, the most reliable customer. So by pursuing a better customer, the federal government, you eliminate 95% of your competition. The third fact I want to talk about is the Small Business Set-Aside Program. The US federal government is unlike any other market. It actually has a small business set-aside program. The restaurant market doesn't have that. You don't see Ronald McDonald standing outside of McDonald's diverting 23% of his drive-through traffic to New Guys Burgers down the street. Or when they have a busload of people, they're not required to subcontract 23% or more of their burgers to you to produce. It just doesn't happen. This is a very, 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 very unique program. It's unique to the federal government. And here's the deal. They are crushing that goal right now. That used to not be the case, but it is now. So that 23% earmark that all federal government contract dollars that are awarded go to small businesses, they're beating that. They're beating it by 10% now. So what does that mean? That means in 2020, according to the fiscal year 2020 SBA scorecard that evaluates how well that they did in their small business set-aside program, they accomplished 109% of their goal, almost 110%. There was $145 billion awarded in prime contracts to small businesses. I want you to think about that. $145 billion in 1 year awarded to small companies that you've never heard of. I can show you the list. I've either led, owned, operated 5 different companies, and you never heard of one of them.
Randall, this is Mike Long. What is what constitutes the small business piece?
That is a great question. Small business. There is no single definition of a small business.
That's what I was wondering.
That's right. So it's defined by this. It's defined by NAICS code, North America Industrial Code System. NAICS codes are codes that was used by the IRS to define the type of work that people do. So the federal government just used that particular Dewey Decimal System as a way to define the types of work that are being awarded on contracts. So each NAICS code has different small business size standards. So, for example, an administrative support NAICS code would maybe have like a $6.5 million small business size threshold. That means that only businesses with a 5-year rolling average of $6.5 million can compete for those type of contracts.
So Randy, that's I guess another question is, are they typically defined by revenue, or is there staff size, or is it always revenue?
95% of it's revenue. Now, some categories that deal with production deal with corporate size. You know what I mean? It's like 500 is the magic number in the production size. If you've got fewer than 500 employees, that's usually the the rule of thumb that for some of those NAICS codes that deal with production. So, but for most of these services, is done by a rolling average of your revenue. So, what does that mean? Well, this is how small businesses grow. Hard to penetrate, takes a little time, start to grow. Then winning becomes easier because you've already got some experience underneath your belt, and then you grow up vertically. So you could be a really large small business and still eke underneath a really small business size threshold. So the point is, and really clever companies, they do what I tried to do. I tried to maneuver my service offering, my company, to always stay under a small business size threshold. I started out, doing, I was in NAICS code 541611, which is, administrative support and management consulting. And that had a $16.5 million small business size threshold. As I was graduating from that one, I transitioned and started doing more software development, which had a 30.5 million small business size threshold. So what you do is you start out doing work that has, a strategy is to start out doing work that has a very small size threshold. And then what you do is as you grow, you change and evolve into more mature NAICS code, doing more complex work, more profitable work. And that's a strategy that a lot of business, successful business owners use. So that's how a small business is defined. It's defined by the type of work that they're doing based upon a NAICS code Dewey Decimal System, that categorizes that. Now, I just find these numbers to be mind-boggling. I really do. $145 billion in prime contracts and $83 billion in awarded subcontracts. Now, you're not going to believe why this number is smaller than the above number. It's the government, they don't care how you get your numbers. Now, on these full and open bids that are meant for large businesses to pursue, they have a mandatory small business subcontracting plan. And they're evaluated on that. That's part of their proposal score to see who wins the contract. So that usually goes anywhere between 23% all the way up to 35%. The more that they give to small businesses, the higher that score. So they're incentivized to give more to small businesses. Now, here's the challenge that these large businesses have. They can't find enough small businesses of certain types in order to give work to. That's shocking when I say that. They can't find enough small businesses of certain types in order to be able to give subcontracts to. So I find that pretty mind-boggling. So which ones are we talking about? I'm talking about, hub zones, historically underutilized business zone companies. And the reason why hub zones are so difficult to find is because in order to be considered a hub zone, you have to have an office in a hub zone area, and you have to employ 35% of your employees from hub zone areas. So let's just play this out. Let's just say you do IT work, and Northrop Grumman says, whoa, we got to have Jason Incorporated. He's a hub zone, and we got to give at least 3% to a hub zone of this $1 billion IT contract to upgrade the Pentagon's IT system. So, that's $30 million that's going. That's 3%. That's a $30 million subcontract that's going to Jason to be able to fulfill their small business subcontracting goal. So Jason gets a $30 million prime contract, subcontract. Now, here's the reality in contracting. And this is why a lot of people don't want to do it. They say like, oh my gosh, I could never recruit, 30 people or 50 people, or I don't know anything about how to do this work. Well,
nice problem to have.
Yeah. 95% of the contracts that are being competed are renewals. They're contracts that are already in place, and they already have contractors in place doing the job. And the federal government loves those contractors because after a period of 5 years, they've already weeded out the bad apples. What they typically don't like when they don't like something with the incumbent, they don't like the leadership. They're either too expensive, they're not supportive, they're not, they're not responsive enough. to the customer's needs. So they say that they shit can, the old leadership team. However, they want to keep the worker bees. Why? Because zero disruption to anything. If they keep the same staff. So Jason shows up. He's just been given a $30 million subcontract. It says, you're in this area. See this entire office of 50 employees? They're going to be yours. So what Jason does is he rebadges them. He takes the losing company's employers who no longer have a job for them, and the people who now desperately want a job, and boy, they'd like to keep their same exact job. So they just go to Jason. So now they're working for Jason. Nothing's changed other than the color of the paycheck, that Jason gives them. It's just a different name on the paycheck. That's it for these guys. I've known people who've been supporting the same customer for literally a quarter of a century. They have spent an entire career supporting the same government entity. They've just done it with 5 different
100 different employers.
That's
Randy,
it.
can I ask you a question? This may be a little bit out of sequence, but here's a problem that is a serious annoyance in, let's call it civilian contracting, right? So when I work for financial institutions or whatnot, and it's payment in arrears, right? So I'll go in and we'll do a bunch of work for some big institution, and sometimes they pay us in 2 weeks, and sometimes they don't actually pay their invoice for 4 months.
Yeah.
How does that work with the government contract? Does the government pay up front? Do they also pay in arrears? How does that work?
There's good news and bad news about the federal government as a customer. The good news is that the government always pays. If the government can't pay their bills, money is the least of our worries. We should be running to caves, you know what I mean? Because the apocalypse just happened. So if the U.S. federal government cannot pay their bills, worse things than money is happening to us. So the good news is that the government will always pay. However, one of the biggest challenges that you have to address early on is how you're going to manage that delay in payment. Because
so it is in arrears.
Once you get going, it's not a problem. The government pays net 30. But what does that net 30 mean? And they'll do net 30. They abide by that religiously. So what does that mean? That means, let's just say you start a contract on January 1st. Well, your employers, they want to get paid on January 15th on payday. So you're paying them. Well, you haven't been paid yet. February 1st rolls around. They want to get paid again. Well, guess what? You're paying them. Now, you just completed an invoice period of a month, but what you have to do is you got to close your books. You've got to package up all your deliverables, all your end of month reports, and then you submit them. And when the government approves your end of month deliverables, then what they will do is they will submit your invoice for payment. And that's when the net 30 kicks in. You will get paid, and net 30 really means exactly 30. The government likes to keep their money for as long as possible. So the big lesson that I learned, and this is the one of the absolute biggest landmines that I stepped on, is I screwed up that process. I didn't know to go to each one of my, my customers as soon as I won the contract and give them sample monthly reports well in advance before they were due, to make sure that we got everything, all the T's crossed, I's dotted, all of that kind of stuff. I didn't think to make sure that the government was competent. I just assumed that they were competent. I didn't verify that they actually had the right budget numbers and accounting numbers on their paperwork in order to make sure that we got paid in a timely manner. So
all right. I want to stick my nose
that's
in
that's a very good question. So, but once you get that,
when I say Randy has things worked down to a science, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like those gotchas.
The reason why is because I stepped on all these landmines. Now I know where they are. You know what I mean? So that was a big landmine, because this is what happened to me on my very first prime contract that I won as a small business. It was for about 25 people. It was a $15 million prime contract, and it's just me. It was so terrifying. It was, all of a sudden you go from 1 to 26 employees, and you're the 26th employee. That's pretty terrifying. They were already there, so I didn't have to go out there and find additional ones, because that would have been terrifying if I actually had to find these people from scratch. So they were already sitting there, and so I hired them. Negotiated salaries. Now, again, the good news about that is I had no overhead. My overhead was, my kitchen table, so to say. So I was making, well over a third profit on this. That's really making close to 40% profit. And if you think about that on a $15 million contract, do the math. You know what I mean? That's making serious coin on one contract, making about 40%, just under 40% on a $15 million prime contract. So those are some pretty good years there, just on that one contract alone. So anyway, what happened is I stepped on a landmine. I didn't think it through. I didn't make sure that I had pre-screened all my deliverables, all my invoicing reports. I didn't make sure that the government had all their paperwork right. So when I submitted it, there was about a 3-month delay working all that stuff out. It could have been worked out so much easier had I fronted that a little bit. So I went 3-4 months, paying people, 25 people. I didn't pay myself at all. I didn't have the money to do that. So I was paying 25 people every 2 weeks, man. I was hemorrhaging cash like there was no tomorrow. And I also screwed up because I got the wrong kind of banking. I had the idea that the bigger the bank, the more money that they could give me. So I just remember the day that I went in there with my big $15 million prime contract. I went to Bank of America and says, "Hey, buddy, I just made us both money. I just want this big $15 million prime contract. I need to be able to make payroll." He says, "No problem at all. I can cut you a check before you even leave today." I thought, "Oh God, thank you so much." The amount of pressure that was lifted off my chest was mind-boggling. So he says, "All you got to do is just tell me how much revenue you made last year, and I can cut you a check for up to 10% of that." And I'm thinking like, this is my very first prime contract. I made $200,000 revenue last year. She said, "I can catch it. I tell you what, I'll even bump that up to 25,000." So I walk out of there with a $25,000 check, 2 days before an $85,000 payroll was coming up. 18 days or 17 days before another $85,000 payroll coming out, a month away from another $85,000 payroll coming out. So again, I didn't get a good bank. There are questions to ask, and there are types of banks that you pursue in order to solve that problem. Big national global banks are not the ones. You want to get the neighborhood local banks. You want to get credit unions because they have the ability to work with you. Because they're not working off a national wide algorithm, that determines how much of a business loan that they can give. You walk in there, and I found banks and I used them later on, with my other startups. And I gave them this exact scenario. I hired 25 people. I got $85,000 in payroll going out, in 3 days. What can you do for me? And they asked me a series of questions. Can you show us your invoices? Yes. Can you show us the contracts? Yes. Can you do this? Yes. Shouldn't be a problem. We can front, all your invoices. It's like, oh God, why didn't I go to this company? Again, that was another landmine that I stepped on. So I got the wrong kind of banks. So that's one, those are the kinds of things that I help people try to navigate. So because there's a lot of money here, I usually show a slide that shows you how big the dollars can get for these small business set-asides. Everybody thinks that small business set-asides are small contracts. The biggest one that I personally won, it wasn't for me, it was for a company that I worked for at the time, small business. It was for $115 million. Think about that. $115 million contract was going to a small business. Now that is crazy. The largest one that I ever won was 65 million. So, for my company. So still 65 million is, you're ramping up a lot. You got to have your act together in order to be able to pull that off. And we were a small business. And then there were a couple other 35 millions in there. Then there was some 23 million, and then there's some 15s and 17 millions in there. So, these small business set-asides, they're not small. And the good news the really good news, and I'm still in my own thunder, is I like the odds. You only got to win one. You win one and you're made. You're a made man or lady. You really are. And you win a $15 million prime contract. You average initially because you got no overhead, because you're so small. You're doing everything yourself. You're working, doing 5 people's job because you're too scared to hire them because you may lose the contract, and then you got all this debt. So you're terrified. You're working scared. You're doing the work of 4 people, but you just netted $2 million that year. You just netted $2 million the next year. That kind of deal. Let me review these. One, big ass budget. Pardon my French, but there's no other description that you can provide. That's over $1 trillion that's being awarded every single year in organizations and in work that's most relevant to what we've done. 2, only 5% of US companies are pursuing federal government contracts. If you pursue federal government contracts, you've eliminated 95% of your competition. 3, small business set-aside program. They are crushing their goals. Now you have small businesses, new businesses that are making their owners gazillionaires, and they're companies you've never even heard of. And so 4, and this is the one that I really want to resonate. You know, if you're hearing my voice, there's some facts about you that make you 100% well positioned to be successful in the industry. 1, if you're ring knockers, you know, you have the absolute most relevant education for these opportunities up here, being a service academy grad. You've got a minimum of 5 years of the most relevant industry experience in the world to win these contracts.
You've written the CAS rep.
That's right. The third one is you've got at least 5 years of experience, you know, most relevant leadership experience in the world to be able to manage and lead a small business. And then finally, it's the people who are here with you, your network, your colleagues, your friends, your shipmates. You know, you get the most relevant network of anybody else in the world. So you are perfectly and ideally positioned to be successful in this industry. And, you know, there's ways that I could talk all day long about how to position yourself, you know, for further success. But this is the big thing. You know, I can't think of too many industries where we as a community are so perfectly and ideally, you know, credentialed to be successful.